Good morning, everyone. My name is Siobhan Horan, and I'd like to welcome you to our KTI webinar this morning. So this is the last webinar in our Unlocking Knowledge Transfer series for this year. Over the last 6 months, we've taken the opportunity to discuss the key topics around the wealth of public research and knowledge available in Ireland and the means through which this can be commercialised. So this morning, following on this theme, we're going to look back over the year to date, and we've invited some experts in to help us explore how the Irish knowledge transfer system has adopted this year. So we'll really be looking at how approaches to commercialisation and industry engagement have been changed to meet the challenges posed throughout 2020. So I'm going to take the opportunity to introduce our panel this morning. So I'm going to go in alphabetical order because I don't know what order they're in on your screen. It might be different to mine. So we have Maria Johnston, Operations and Enterprise Development Manager at DCU Invent. We have Helen McBreen, Investment Director at Atlantic Bridge. We have Josette O'Malan, Innovation and Enterprise Manager at CIT. And we have Declan Weldon, Head of Office and Deputy Director at the Office of Corporate Partnership and Knowledge Transfer at Trinity College Dublin. And our discussion this morning is going to be chaired by Alison Campbell, Director of Knowledge Transfer Ireland. So just before I pass over to Alison, I'm just going to go through a few very quick notes of housekeeping. So just to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded, so if you have any issues with your connection this morning or if the postman comes to the door, do not worry, you can find this recording and all the other webinars in the series on our KTI YouTube channel. And also just to say that the format of the webinar this morning will be a discussion with our panelists followed by a Q&A session. So we would really welcome your questions throughout the morning and any comments that you may have, and I will pose those to the panelists at the end of the discussion. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Alison.
Siobhan, thank you, and welcome to everybody on the panel for what is the last of our series of webinars. And I'm going to take the luxury of saying something that I'd normally say at the end first, which is a big thank you to Siobhan herself for pulling together this webinar series for us over the past 6 months. And as we're looking at what's happened generally within the sector and where we might be going in the future, it's also good to look at this as one of the things that we'd often thought we might try, but there was nothing like the external environment causing us to have a crack. And we've just been delighted with the webinars, the diversity and not just the level of attendance and feedback, but also so many people who've so kindly given up their time to be on the panel with us, and the people who were with us today are no exception. So enough from me on that. Let's talk to them. And I did a short survey about a week or so ago with the knowledge transfer and the technology transfer offices and asked them to look back over the past few months and to look forward as well. And what was very clear to me that there really has been quite a lot of adaptation in all sorts of ways, and it looks like some of it is set to stick. So maybe Josette and Declan, a question to the two of you. How have you been adapting processes in your organisations, and what do you think might be set to stick for the coming year for you? Josette, would you like to kick off?
Yes, well, I suppose like many people, I had this icon flashing at me for a few months before the pandemic started, and it was something that had been installed by CIT, but none of us had really engaged it really properly, and it was the MS Teams. But I'll tell you, it became our best friend very quickly, and we were all experts within a few days. So in terms of processes, we were lucky that had been installed and ready to go, and we were ready to use it the day the institute closed in the beginning of March. And I suppose one of the first phone calls I took was from one of our business development guys in the gateway to know, can we keep signing contracts with companies? Will we still be able to provide NDAs to companies? He was very anxious that all of that would continue, and we were able to assure him that yes, we could continue issuing contracts, issuing NDAs, so he could continue engaging with the clients that he was dealing with and potentially was going to start dealing with.
How's it been for you, Declan?
Similar. I mean, we made the transition to working from home with relative ease. There was a plan in place kind of for what would happen if, and within a working week, everybody was from the office was set up and working from home, and that kind of surprised us that it was as easy as that just to get going. But of course, and then the adaptation to the new tools like Teams and Zoom and the etiquette around that and learning how to use that efficiently. Certainly, meetings are much shorter now. They're much more to the point. There's a process efficiency that we've seen over the last 9 months come in that's fantastic. And electronic signatures, of course, are now widely adopted, whereas before that was everybody's, you know, pain in the neck. So there are those types of things will stay. But how that evolves is going to be very interesting, because as Josette said, the engagement model with industry or with, you know, academics, just the face-to-face stuff has suffered greatly over that time, and we're all trying to work out what the best engagement model is now for the next year.
So it sounds like you've definitely seen some good changes, which actually will have benefit to company clients in terms of the I can't get the word out, making things more online and automatic. It really is feeling like the end of the week already. Automation has been a thing that's clearly had some benefits, and I guess for everybody that recognition that we can now negotiate online, we can sign contracts online, actually really must sort of speed up process flow and make it less painful for companies, which is brilliant. But I think to your point about how do we do the business development, whether that be internally or externally, I think can be quite a challenge. And Maria, you took one of your very successful events, your matchmaking. You took that online this year, didn't you? How did that go for you?
That's right. So I suppose just by way of background, we're our flagship industry engagement event of the year is the Research and Business Matchmaker, where researchers and companies that are interested in possible collaborations, they all put up their respective profiles, and we use a software platform called B2Match. So it's a full day event. We have a number of presentations. We give an overview of research capability in DCU. We have some case studies from companies that have engaged, along with an overview of funding mechanisms and a research showcase. But really the most important part of the event itself is the series of 15-minute one-to-one meetings that are held in both the morning and the afternoon. And this has always been a physical event. It takes place in the Helix on the DCU campus, and it's always been a great event with some collaborations resulting from it. And we had just finalised our date for October of this year, back in March, when COVID hit. And we were left thinking, well, what's plan B here? And fortunately, the software platform providers very quickly brought out a virtual meeting function. So we decided to give it a try. And we held our event on the 22nd of October. And from our perspective, it's definitely been the most successful event yet. We put in a huge digital marketing effort to try and onboard new companies, new participants. We had the highest number of registrations to date. We had the highest engagement of researchers putting up their profiles also, and the highest number of companies participating. And this event really is all about taking connecting with and engaging with and attracting new companies. And we were very pleased with the caliber and the type of companies that actually attended. They were really committed to getting involved, to learning more, to hearing more. And so the event went really well. We were able to reach a much wider audience than normal. In fact, we reached out internationally, and we had 10 countries represented, but the majority of the registrations came from Ireland and some from the UK. And in previous years as well, we would various circumstances, we would have companies that wouldn't be able to turn up on the day. It might be delays in traffic or accidents on the motorway or bad weather, but actually all of those who registered for our virtual event actually participated. The presentations were very well received, and they were much shorter than we would normally have had, and I think that's the key also to a successful event. But the people who participated were really engaged, and the companies and the researchers were very strategic in who they wished to meet virtually on the day, and we actually had 153 virtual meetings take place, which was the highest one to date. And I suppose just one of the downsides was we didn't have that informal networking piece happen, those introductions that are made over coffees and over lunch, and also we didn't have the research showcase. But we're thinking about how we may be able to incorporate that into future virtual events. So the feedback has been really good so far. Companies really liked the virtual format. They found it very informative. They made great contacts on the day. It also meant that they didn't have to take a day away from the office, and there was no waiting around for meetings. So as with previous events, we'll have to wait and see how the follow-ups go, and whether people meet virtually or face-to-face in the coming weeks and months. But we were very pleased with how the online event went.
I think we'll be interested to check in with you to see how that's gone and what results come out of it. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things that you were saying there, Maria, I was talking to a bunch of people internationally, and they were saying that in terms of the overall business development, you have to put more effort into it beforehand. You have to be very clear and very targeted about what you're doing. But actually, their sense was the quality of the engagement that you then got was well worthwhile, and almost it's a kind of repurposing, whereas previously one might have been a little bit more relaxed and a lot could be done in an in-person meeting. It's now tailor, target, focus, but jolly well worthwhile. But many people have also been saying, just as you were, there's still bits left. So if you know who you want to talk to and why you want to talk to them, there's a good chance of something happening. But you miss out on those serendipitous conversations, the known unknowns, or even the unknown knowns, where other things come out of the side, and that seems to be an element that people are missing. But a very blended approach. Now, moving on, I guess slightly from thinking about how companies are engaging, one of the other things that we took a look at was the spin-out environment. How potential founders were feeling, and how investors were feeling, and what the appetite was like during the year, and certainly during the second half of the year. There were overall, what was coming back was sort of fairly mixed. In some institutions, they've seen business as usual. In one or two, there'd been a bit of an acceleration, and in others, it felt a little bit more depressed. But Declan, you produce a lot of spin-outs from Trinity. What's your experience been over the year and over the last 9 months?
There was some fuel in the tank, so there was momentum that kept us going at the same pace for a while. But after a couple of months, we started to see the difference in the sectors. So you'd see, those spin-outs that were in the pipeline that needed clinical trials or trials with medtech equipment. And those things just stopped for a while, so they were affected quite badly at the beginning. But those that were ICT based kept going, so the pipeline did stutter a little bit at the beginning around therapeutics and medtech, but it's all moving now as people get back into labs and got back to do their jobs. But I think one of the big concerns for us is around the funding area. And I think Brian Caulfield wrote a great article in the Times on Monday about it, and Scale Ireland have been talking about it. A dramatic drop off in funding for levels that really are seed levels below 1 million or 1 million to 5 million. There's a 20% drop year on year. And that's really concerning to us, because of course we will see the effect of that in the next 6 months or in the next 9 months. So I think we managed well. The pipeline is strong, despite some issues at the beginning. But the real concern is looking forward to the next 6-9 months.
You're an investor. What's it been like for you?
Yeah, I think focusing on the second half of the year, once we triaged the portfolio from March to those early months of the pandemic, and we spent a lot of time triaging the portfolio and making sure that companies had sufficient runway to carry them through for at least 12 months. But then into the second half of the year, it's been very, very busy. I think the numbers speak for themselves from our perspective. We continue to invest, we continue to fundraise, and we continue to drive a lot of strong deal flow from the universities, specifically on spin-outs. So we completed 3 transactions in new Spinouts, 2 from UCD, Output Sports and Plasma Bound, and a large investment round from Trinity in 1 projects. We did a whole bunch of follow-on investments as well, and have a number of Spinouts at term sheet as well. So all told, including the successes that those companies have had with non-dilutive funding as well, I think the number is around 60 million now has been raised by those companies in 2020, which I think speaks to the level of activity that's going on. Now, the challenge is Atlantic Bridge University Fund is probably the most active when it comes to spin-outs, but we can't be the only. And to Declan's point, and to a lot of the news in the press and so on, there is a funding challenge there. We ourselves as investors want to see more funds in the market, want to see more early stage companies, and want to see more investors interested in the outputs of university spinouts. For us, it's twofold. It helps us build strong syndicates. The companies that build strong syndicates early get further runway and more expertise around the table early. So we really want to find more syndicate partners and not be alone in the journey of funding spinouts. But also, I think it puts a lot of pressure on angel groups who have been hugely supportive of spinouts, which is brilliant. But unfortunately, they can't take the companies the whole way because of capital ability and requirements and so on that they might have, and constraints. So, we syndicate both with angel investors and institutionals, but there's a gap there. There's more funds needed in the market for all early stage investments, not for all startups. So that's an issue that does need to be tackled and is a challenge. But overall, I guess the positives from our perspective is that it has been very active and strong deal flow from the universities coming out. I do worry a little bit about, that lack of contact with the teams, and even for the teams and the spinouts and the founders to interact with each other, in a peer-to-peer way. I think a lot of that face-to-face contact in the incubators and in the campus company spaces is being missed, and I think about what effect that might have on companies, because the learnings that each of those companies goes through is so applicable to the people at the next desk or in the next office. So I worry a bit about that challenge, but everybody's, I guess, doing the best that they can virtually.
Josette, you were nodding there. What are your views around that?
It's as you know, the on-campus incubators in the regions are very important hubs for activity and startups, and we find the same, that while our level of clients hasn't dropped dramatically, but the level of usage of the incubator has dropped. And we are concerned that the impact that will have long term, even for the incubator itself, but also for the clients themselves, and lacking that interaction with each other, with the team on the ground in the Rubicon, with their advisors, and not having the ability to meet people face to face. I think it is detrimental, definitely, in the short term. Hopefully all of that will recover sooner rather than later, but definitely I think the activity in the incubators has dropped, and that is a pity.
So you mentioned regional there, Josette.
Yeah.
Has your focus in any way shifted over the past few months in terms of the companies that you're working with and supporting?
It has, but not in the way you think, actually. Obviously, the region is a focus for us in terms of our mandate, in terms of regional development. And we have been reaching out to companies in the region that we may not have dealt with before, because they were looking for advice in lots of areas. And they did reach out to us as well. But actually, ironically, it looks like our client base has widened during the pandemic because of the online and the remote delivery process. So for instance, EI have told us that we've done 60 innovation vouchers this year already. We did 63 last year, so we haven't even finished counting for this year. So our numbers of those kind of engagement with SMEs have gone up, but also we do a map every year on the engagement of the gateways in terms of where their clients are. And usually they would be locally or within the Munster region, But it looks like now a lot of those engagements with smaller companies are much further afield, Dublin, Galway, and places like that. So for us, actually, that is the change that we have seen. It has broadened our client base, especially when it comes to the innovation vouchers. So
fascinating. Is that a combination of companies themselves being more interested in innovating, basically, and solving problems? And is it also, do you think, in part due to, certainly I know the gateways are really trying to, form themselves as a network and cross-refer. Are we seeing some benefits from that, do you think?
We do, certainly, but also I think our business development people are maybe doing more cold calling, because they want to keep the projects coming in. So they are able to engage with more people when they are maybe sitting at home on the phone or on the computer. So they have access to more people, more potential clients. But also on the other side, the clients maybe feel they have a little bit more time at the moment. They mightn't be as busy with customers. So they're looking at processes internally. How can we change what we're doing to make ourselves more resilient, more effective, more productive? So I think they're open to looking at innovation maybe now at this point as well, to make sure that they're ready for a takeoff when it does happen next year, and maybe using that time productively where they're not maybe engaging as much with customers at the moment.
Thanks. I mean, talking about helping companies and providing advice more generally, Declan, at Trinity, you've got a consultancy services unit based there, and I think you did something around COVID times, didn't you, to do further outreach?
Yeah, I think at the very beginning, and it was a request that came from the SFI Centre hosted at Trinity Amber. At the very beginning, they were inundated with requests from Irish SMEs for support, and it was mainly consultancy support about everything from materials for ventilators, gels, clothing, masks, etc., because of their speciality in Amber as a materials centre. And they were looking for, how do we engage with this broad brush of industry folks in a quick, efficient way? And of course, consultancy is a great way to do that. It's a great first touch between a university and industry. So we created the opportunity for any company that wanted to work with a PI in Trinity through consultancy, that we would do it. And if it was COVID related, if it was all towards, all of that panic about getting solutions for COVID, that we would do it for free. So we had a free consultancy service where it was COVID related. And we'd won quite large success through Amber on that with an Irish company that was making materials for hospitals. And they wanted that expertise in Amber. And that's now developed into a bigger relationship with Amber, which is success. But it was a very, first touch how to engage with the university. And at the beginning of the March, April, May was very, very popular. It's petered off now as that demand has petered off from industry. But yeah, it was just something that made things really easy and flexible to work with the university.
That's great. I just love to hear this sort of these tales of things we've tried and adaptations, and also understanding really how the market's responded to those. And I think it's very true, isn't it? Some of those responses will be time bounded as we begin. I mean, I certainly know, talking to a variety of tech transfer offices in Ireland and elsewhere, that there was, I think, as for every company, there was very much a focus on what do we do now, how do we change things, where are we going? And a lot more of the conversation, whilst that nuance hasn't and can't go away, but a lot of the focus of discussions now has gone back to, okay, how do we do business? Not necessarily as normal, but let's talk about the normal business of doing business. As I think we've settled down, cognizant of the environment around us. So look, that brings me on to just a general reflection, perhaps from all of you. And let's be positive about this. What's perhaps been the most positive outcome in terms of either teams or business for you in the past year? Helen?
I think there's lots of different positive outcomes. I think one, speaking about the portfolio companies that we've invested in, what springs to mind there, Alison, is that many of them are actually, contributing to solving the pandemic, or at least contributing with their technology solutions to the world where we, will continue to live in this kind of scenario. So we have companies like Castus, who are providing antimicrobial solutions, and they're effective against COVID. Siren have been doing a lot of work in the contact tracing area. And then, of course, we've had drone delivery of medicines as well through Mana. So they're just 3 examples of some of the portfolio companies that are playing with the wind into new opportunities, which has been good. I think some other positive outcomes, from our own perspective as investors, we have continued to make new investments, even when we've had scenarios where other investors have unfortunately had to pull out of a deal. So we've continued to actually support those companies with capital investment, and then we've been busy ourselves fundraising, and are hoping to have a new pool of capital for Spinouts up and running in the near future. So it's been an incredibly active and busy time, but most of that activity, when you cut away the negative part of not being able to interact in a face-to-face way, I think there is a tremendous amount of positive outcomes that have happened over the last 9 months.
That's really terrific to hear. Maria, what are your thoughts on this?
A few thoughts, I suppose, reflecting on the whole pandemic situation. I think we've become much more efficient working virtually, and meetings are certainly much shorter and much more focused. And I think certainly in our experience, we're still managing to get deals over the line, both nationally and internationally. And I suppose possibly it depends on people's preference to work face to face or indeed work virtually, but I think that they can still certainly be done. One of the things this brings to mind for me would be the importance of digital marketing, and I think a lot more people, we're all in the virtual world now, and we're not actually able to attend physical events and network in those traditional ways. So the importance of engaging on Twitter, on LinkedIn, using platforms like Impart, etc., and really important just to use the opportunity to build up that substantial bank of marketing collateral to use to engage going forward.
Brilliant. Josette, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, well, in terms of the efficiency, I think this is probably my 3rd recession that I've worked in now, and for all of those recessions, there's always an interest in people starting their own business, always. And we've seen a big surge in inquiries and interest in starting a business. So in order to manage all of those, we've used the new methods of working to meet people, to meet them quickly, to engage with them quickly. And so that's been a positive for us, that we're able to manage the number of inquiries now that have started to come in. But second of all, we've been able to internationalize some of the work that we were doing in the incubator, for instance. We've engaged with international consultants now that we will be able to use in our training programs for consultancy with our clients. And so that's a big positive. And we ran an international event for the first time out of the incubator a couple of weeks ago. It was for Global Entrepreneurship Week, and it was truly a global event because of this new way of working. So there's been lots of positives for us in CIT and in the Rubicon as a result.
That's brilliant. Declan, can you top that?
Well, and only if I lean on the answers of the last 2 speakers, I think Maria and Josette put their fingers on it. Really, the new skills that the team have developed, and one of the real positives over the last 9 months, despite everything, is working with a team of people who've adapted really, really well to the new environment, and we're all still talking to each other. That's been a huge plus for me. And I think the new skills that people have developed on the digital marketing side, on the production side for webinars, we have a team now in place that have done that a few times and are skilled at it. And finding those, I mean, everybody would tell us that tech transfer is a contact sport, right? That's always what people said at conferences. And what we're trying to do is find what's the equivalent or the loss of that contact sport at the moment, and what's the blend between where we can actually meet people or do it online. So a lot of positives around that, a lot of excitement looking forward to next year to how that model's going to develop. Of course, we've just started work on building the new innovation hub down at Grand Canal. So that's incredibly interesting for Trinity and for all of those involved in it. So there's a lot of positive outlook for next year, and knowing that we've coped with the last year, I think the team know that we can fairly much cope with what's coming as well. So yeah.
So looking forward, and it's great to hear that you feel you've got the exciting things and you can all cope. But what's overall as a panel, what's your outlook for research commercialisation in 2021? We've already heard a few things. Notwithstanding we've managed to get round how you might deal with that sort of personal contact issue. There's been a few sort of things peppered in there about pipeline, for example, maybe funding and others. What do you think is the biggest challenge that lies ahead in 2021? And maybe Giuseppe, we'll start with you.
I think capacity maybe in physical laboratories because of social distancing and turning out, maybe delivering on projects and taking on new projects. It's just a capacity issue. I mean, we've always had a capacity issue, so now it's more of a problem at the moment. So hopefully that will resolve itself fairly quickly, maybe in the middle of next year. But certainly for us, I think that could be an issue going forward. But working very hard in terms of even pivoting the type of projects we are looking at and focusing on to make sure that we can continue to deliver a service and engage with companies as we've always done.
Maria, biggest challenge you see ahead for the year?
I suppose depending on the sector, there has been some of the activities, for example, lab-based work has had to stall somewhat, and so there may be a time lag between when research projects actually started and when we actually managed to get them over the line. So I suppose it's trying to keep companies on board during that time and really trying to onboard new companies as well. But I think the challenges remain as they always are, getting engagement with companies, getting deals done, whether they're nationally or internationally, and getting funding for our spin-out. So I don't necessarily think the challenges have changed hugely despite the pandemic.
So that is almost a business as usual and challenges as usual. Declan, what are your reflections?
Very much the same. I'd simplify it all down to funding, whether it's funding for the research environment in Ireland, and we all know how poor that is overall. That really needs to improve, because that's the fuel for everything we do, right? And also funding for spin-outs, and that needs to improve. And Helen spoke well on that early on. I mean, there's a lot of issues there. I think a lot of them can be done through policy, but let's see how that works out. So yeah, the biggest challenge I'd say is funding.
Funding for you, and turning to not so much a funder, but as an investor. Helen, last word with you. What do you see ahead in terms of the research commercialisation system for 2021?
I think there's a huge amount of opportunity within it. A lot of strong projects that we're tracking that have been funded within the university and IT environments. So really interesting technologies and potential spin-outs are going to emerge from that ecosystem over the next several years. I would encourage those that are, planning on going on that spin-out route to pursue it, despite a lot of the challenges that we have spoken about. I think some of our strongest opportunities and our strongest companies, emerge in these kind of challenging times. And we've got an enormous depth of research within the ecosystem that can play to the strengths of market needs. So I would encourage any of those founders who are thinking of going on this journey to do it, but to see how much help and support they can leverage from within their systems. The rest of the panel have talked about the various supports that are within their institutions, and there's a whole host more, from the likes of Enterprise Ireland and so on. But they've got to think, those founders have to think about how they can de-risk their opportunity, even in the context of a narrow funding window or with limited investors there. So trying to get that non-dilutive, applying for your DTIFs, reapplying if you don't get it, your EICs starting 2020 and so on. So really focusing on non-dilutive funding as a source of de-risking. But then, when you do start to to de-risk. You've really got to build out your team and engage with investors with that whole story around market opportunity, and proving the validation that you've had and those steps that you've taken have begun to de-risk the opportunity. Syndicate partners are always going to be a challenge, as we've talked about. There is opportunity to engage with investors, but to just kind of hear and work with investors as another source of support to help you build out syndicates as well. At Atlantic Bridge, we certainly have very strong international connections, and we're not alone in that. So trying to bring in other investors into Ireland can be another source of institutional capital. It's challenging because we can't get on planes and build those relationships, but you have to sort of indirectly do that through those who have contacts with other funds.
Thank you. So really, I think what I've heard from all of you about the outlook for 2021 is, and I'm going to paraphrase this, it's relatively positive because there is a lot of activity. It's going to be quite challenging because there is a lot of activity, and we're all very cognizant that the resources and the funding around that themselves may be vulnerable. But I think that what's certainly very clear from the four of you is that commitment to the year ahead, and actually just the sheer volume of work and different kinds of activities that you're all going to be involved in, which is terrific. And let's hope that the pipeline holds up for next year. I'm sure in your good hands, and with the thought that you and your colleagues are putting around it, that we'll be in good shape. So thanks very much to the four of you for joining us this morning. I'll hand back to you, Siobhan, now.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you to our panelists as well for sharing your views throughout the morning. So we have quite a few questions coming in, and they are general questions, so I am going to throw them out to the panel. But Declan, I'm going to start with yourself and invite you to answer our first question. It's about the role of social enterprises. So what role do you see social enterprises playing going forward, and how do you engage with social enterprises at present in Trinity?
A really good question, and I think it's something where we have a lot of work to do to improve. I think there's models in Europe with European universities where the social innovation, the social enterprise is part of the mainstream pipeline of spin-outs coming out of the college. And I think across Ireland we have a way to go to do that, to integrate it in. So we, working directly with folks who are attached to the business school and social innovation, trying to develop a model that can sit beside the traditional model to help those people. So we've got people reaching out on that at the moment, and we've, you know, the social innovation model in terms of a company coming out, there's different definitions about what it is and what it can be. We recently campus company approval to a company called Way to Be, which is right on the cusp of social innovation and technological innovation, and that company is doing great. So I think there's a way to go to improve how we engage with those enterprises, and, you know, do them in parallel with their current pipeline.
Gisette, I'll ask you to come in on that as well. I see you nodding to what Declan has been saying.
Well, I suppose I'm nodding because we have a very active student enterprise and student entrepreneurship activity, and many of those ideas tend to be social entrepreneurship, social enterprises, in fact. So we do have programs in place to support that and encourage that. As Declan said, not so much in companies externally, but certainly the companies that are being generated internally within the institute, and in partnership with UCC and IT3, we do see a lot of activity in that space among the student population. And that's not unusual. You know, they want to change the world. They want to make sure this is a better place for everybody. So it's fantastic to see their enthusiasm for those type of companies and their commitment to those businesses when they do start them.
Well, I just say, I mean, Tangent in Trinity does a wonderful job on that, on the student enterprise side, and every year, and it hosts Launchbox as well, and we see a huge amount of great projects coming from that. So I think there is strong, as Gisette said, there's strong support around the student side, but I think there's a way to go to improve in other areas.
So we have a question coming in as well, and Maria, I'm going to ask you to answer this one first. It's around online engagements, and this question is coming in from a company that really likes the online engagements and really feels that this can speed up the process of making the introduction with a university. So is this something that you will think about, keeping in place for 2021 if we do go back to normal, or the old normal?
Yeah, I think so, definitely. If the company is referring to our matchmaker event, certainly I think it enables us to reach a much broader audience of companies geographically. It's much more efficient in terms of time involved, and certainly it's something that we will definitely, I think, continue with, and possibly there may be an opportunity for hybrid type events where you will still have a part physical or actual event and then a part virtual as well. So it may be an opportunity to have a mix of physical meetings and virtual meetings, and I think we might look at investigating that model more in the new year.
So we are kind of quickly coming up to our time, so I'm just going to ask one last question, and that is, you've described a lot of really great creative initiatives that you've put in place throughout 2020. If we were to go back to working in our offices 5 days a week in 2021, are there any of these initiatives that you would like to keep in place?
Well, definitely. I think the whole access to a wider client base, to wider collaboration. I think now we're convinced that it's a good idea, and they're acceptable now to everybody. So I think definitely we'll be using a mixture of these going forward. I mean, we do miss the face-to-face, the coffee break in a conference or whatever, where you do meet people, but we'll definitely be using them to our advantage in terms of making sure we can reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, I just second that. I mean, we know from our experience in the last 9 months that we can keep pace with the change. So the next 9 months, 12 months will be fascinating to see how the whole thing evolves. But I think if we were to go back to, I don't think we'd ever go back to 5 days a week working in the office, by the way. I think what everybody's learned over the past 9 months is that whatever the future is, it'll be a hybrid of that. And that efficiency then that we've learned, that we've built into the system the last 9 months, will continue and get better through that.
So I'll just ask Maria and Helen as well, just on that question. Do you have any final remarks on any of the new initiatives that you're going to keep in place for 2021?
Yeah, I think it's certainly opened up the opportunity to, it's less about 5 days a week now, and it's probably always on 7 days a week, because all you need is your computer to kind of connect with somebody. But I think that brings to one of the points that we had talked about pre-panel, which was about work-life balance and making sure that you can progress everything and keeping up with the pace, because everything is so deliberate. There's so much intent with everything. There's a huge amount of volume to be dealing with, and it's difficult sometimes to turn off when others are on, because you're not going to have that kind of match. So I think it's a case of kind of setting your own boundaries as well a little bit. But certainly I think there's a huge amount of opportunity and positive change that allow us to work much more flexibly now, and as Josette said, totally acceptable as well.
And Maria, I'll let you have the final word on that question.
Sure. Yeah. I suppose we've all just become way more efficient, and there are upsides and downsides to that, as the panel have mentioned. That social interaction, that meeting the researcher as you're crossing the campus and getting an update on things without being, everything has become much more formal, much more structured, and much more efficient. But certainly from a time management perspective, I think it's an improvement. You think of the amount of times that we have spent going to meetings, traveling either nationally or internationally as well, and how the likes of these platforms, the Teams, the Zooms, have enabled us to do all of that. And I think just the huge opportunity to do business nationally, to reach out to other companies and other collaborators nationally in a way that we wouldn't have been able to do so before. So I think I'm very positive about how things are going to look for 2021, and we just need to maintain the momentum. And I think there's an air of optimism about what's happening with the whole release of vaccines, etc. So I'm quite positive about how things are going to go in 2021.
I think we'll leave our Q&A session on that lovely optimistic note. And I'd like to thank all our panelists for their contributions this morning. So I'd like to thank Gisette, Helen, Maria and Declan. We're getting lots of really positive feedback in from those of you that are listening in this morning. And I would like to invite you to continue to submit your feedback following on from this webinar. It's really valuable to us, and it really helps us to define the topics as we move into 2021. And on that, our webinar series will be continuing next year. We will be back on the 12th of January, and we'll be looking at putting together an IP strategy. And then in February, we will be looking at the topic of climate change. So we will be sending out more information about that in the coming days, and we hope that you will join us then. So with that, thank you all for attending this morning, and we hope that you have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye.